Welcome. It's Basketball by Association. I'm Joel Cordes, and we're ready to talk about the Central Division as we get ready for the NBA season preview, the season start. Training camps have begun. It's a super exciting time of year. If you haven't checked out our other three previews so far, we've hit the Atlantic, we got the Northwest. There's at least one other division in there that I'm forgetting about. So check it out on Basketball by Association. You can find us on YouTube, like, share, subscribe. Hit the bell over there. Do all those cool things. Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes is where you go if you want the audio-only version. As you can see, no Archie Shea. And by the way, it was the Southwest Division. That was the other one that we got. No Archie Shea. I've got Joey Mueller here. First time on the show. Welcome. It's cool to have you in studio with us. Joey is a buddy of mine. And as you might be able to tell from the shirt, is a Milwaukee Bucks fan. So what better time to bring on a Bucks fan than the Central Division preview. Before we get to that, we got to name the episode, as we always do. A minor milestone of an episode. It's 120 for us now here on Basketball by Association, the resurrected version. We did 100 plus episodes with Bleacher Report back in the day as well. There's only two players in NBA history, Joey, who have ever had 120 career playoff games. One was Steve Nash. He'd be more than worthy of us to name the episode after him, but we've already done that before in the past. I don't even remember if it was episode 13 or a point guard episode or whatever. So we're going with ISO Joe. It's the Joe Johnson episode, a guy who isn't really on the NBA radar in a lot of ways because he was on winning teams, but not championship winning teams. He was a supporting cast or part of the supporting cast briefly with the 7 seconds or less Suns. So we got the tie in there, but you look at the accolades of Joe Johnson, 7-time All-Star. He was on the All-Rookie team, was an All-NBA team member in 09-10, multiple playoff appearances, a long career. In fact, he appeared in one game last year for the Boston Celtics at the age of 40 years old. ISO Joe was in the league last year, so we may still see an appearance. That was that game where COVID popped back up and the Celtics had like 7 different guys that either failed tests or weren't vaccinated yet. And we weren't exactly sure who was who. And they were getting ready to go on a Toronto trip and they had to sign a whole bunch of people. So Joe Johnson started his career with the Boston Celtics, was drafted by the Celtics, kind of a cool full circle there. And he had been traded and did those seasons in Phoenix, probably most well known in Atlanta for that long stretch, 6 straight All-Star appearances, then with the Nets for a little bit, and then bounce around Miami, Utah, Houston, and so forth. Here's the thing, though, that people love to point out with Joe Johnson. There was some mega contracts, and thanks to Basketball Reference, I'm going to try to pull that up. This is a guy who made $220 million and counting, perhaps, in the league. Any memories that you have of Joe Johnson, or is he one of those guys that just was in the background? Because that's kind of how he is for me, where it's like, yeah, he scored a bunch of points and was on some decent teams, but he was never like the guy. I just remember us talking about the Joe Johnson contracts was always the thing. Like, super high paid.
All I remember is when he was a free agent for a while, and there was speculation on will he, won't he, and where he will sign. And then when he did, nothing materialized really.
I do remember he was one of the first NBA players that was really beginning to cross into the mid $20 million per year on a contract. There was only a couple years that he did that, but we're only 10 years ago that was really beginning after the league had put in the salary cap. And there were certain guys who were going to have to play long enough to reach that threshold. Of course, you think back like the original Kevin Garnett contract and Alonzo Mourning and Juwan Howard and some of those guys before the salary cap existed, and they were being handed like just ridiculous money, and the league stepped in and said, no. And it was going to be a while, but Joe Johnson for a while was making like in the neighborhood of Kobe money, which is what I think the expectations always then overshadowed what he actually produced on the court. But nonetheless, Joe Johnson, ISO Joe, will do you proud. And he wasn't a player that I was really into during his career, but now I kind of want him to show up for another game or two, get signed by somebody, be in the league. That's kind of cool. All right. We're going to start at the top of the Central Division, at least the way that they finished last year, which without further ado, your Milwaukee Bucks, 51-31. They had a shot at the Eastern Conference Championship last year, both record-wise and, in the playoffs themselves. We're not able to repeat on a title, but did some things here during the offseason to try to reload, because it seems like over the last few seasons, the Eastern Conference not only keeps getting tougher and tougher, but more elite at the top. And for the first time in memory, maybe since the first time since the Jordan era of the Chicago Bulls, the Eastern Conference has clearly been the better conference over the last couple seasons. So as you're looking at their offseason, you're looking into next year, what gets you excited about them? Any moves that they made? They were kind of quiet, though, on the offseason front, but any changes where you're like, I'm looking forward to this?
Well, I look at them, they didn't make very many changes, and I feel like they didn't necessarily need to as well. If they would have remained healthy in the playoff time, I feel like they could have pushed the Celtics to win that series to go to the Eastern Conference Championship, and that would have been interesting to see. But obviously, injuries happen, and you can't control that.
Chris Middleton was the big one,
yes.
But Holiday seemed to be hobbled, and Lopez was still coming back from injury and not 100%.
Yep, exactly. So I like what they did in the offseason here. They basically remained pat with their core group of guys. They added Joe Ingles. If he can come back from his injury and be even 80% of what he used to be, he'll be a fantastic addition to that bench crew that comes in, as well as their draft pick, Marjan. I think he'll do real well. He's got some explosiveness to him, and if he can pull in that 3-point shot a little, hone in on that a little more, I feel like he'll be a fantastic addition to the Bucks. And they just re-signed recently Jordan Nwora, and I feel like that's a solid re-signing because he can put in some solid minutes when he's called upon.
Do you think Marchand, and this is Beauchamp, that he'll have a role this season already, or is it get your feet wet? Because on the one hand, Mike Budenholzer is one of those coaches who's not really known for giving young guys a ton of burn. It's not Tom Thibodeau bad, but it's not all that far off from where Thibodeau is either, where you got to have a couple of seasons before they trust you. But on the flip side, and maybe will be a good tie into some of the concerns with this team, it still looks like guys like George Hill and Wes Matthews are going to be in the rotation in some ways. And I don't know how much they have left in the tank. Like, they've given reliable minutes to the Bucks over the last couple seasons and even last year, but nothing more than reliable. And the cracks, the mileage on the tires are really beginning to show.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that was one of the other points, was that Mike Budenholzer doesn't use his rookies very often in big spots, and only uses them when he needs to for, injuries or rest days. So I feel like he'll be touch and go for him. He'll get a few minutes here, a few minutes there. I don't think he'll be an impact player for most of the season, but if he can show that his explosiveness, if it translates onto the court in the NBA, I feel like he can still add a 5 to 7 minutes a game of high octane spark.
Forward Joe Ingles is coming off a major injury and is a lot older than people realize, having done essentially a full career playing over in the Australian leagues before he came to the Utah Jazz as a 30-year-old, basically. But Ingles signed coming off the ACL. He, didn't play much last year, obviously, and didn't play at all after the injury, was traded to Portland and then was eventually cut. It's going to be some time for him to come back. We're seeing reports that it's going to be January before he's suited up. When, assuming that he is healthy, what kind of role do you see him being able to play for the Milwaukee Bucks, a team that, as good as they are at the top, and with Giannis, and we'll get to him in a moment, depth has kind of been touch and go with them. And Ingles is a really interesting player, a guy that we did get to see a lot of in Utah because he was either the sixth man or a starter for some really good teams that made the playoffs too.
Yeah. I don't know what kind of role he'll carve out. Obviously, an ACL is a hard injury to return from at any point. And as you said, yes, he's a little older. I think 35 years old, I believe. So yeah, it may take some time for him, even after he returns from the injury, to get his playing legs underneath him again. So at that point, I think you're really just prepping him for the postseason. If you want to utilize him as the 3-point shooter that he can be, that he's shown in the past, I feel like that would be the best route to go.
Ingles, prior to the injury, was a very underrated defender. Maybe not the lead defender on a team, but had shown that he could be your second best or third best defender. And I think there may still be something there if he's able to get that mobility back. The area that really intrigues me for the Bucks is Ingles as the passer and facilitator. He was an incredible hockey assist guy in Utah as far as being the one that just kept the ball popping. And that's why he played as much as he did, was because the pace, the tempo worked for Utah, which was a very system-oriented offense, which is kind of similar to what Milwaukee does when you think about Budenholzer. There's a plan there, and there's a system, and there's a bunch of different reads. And I think Ingles fits in very well with that. Wasn't necessarily a high assist number guy, but was a decent number with that. And the on-off numbers was the really big one with Ingles, just how efficient the team would run whenever he was on the floor. And that's got to be the hope, but trying to integrate a guy like that who could be a key, offensive piece in the machinery is difficult to do in January if that's when he's going to be back, to try to integrate that and then get him on the same page with a new team and all the other players knowing where he's going to be and, where the ball's going to pop. I think this is where him being a very experienced player will have to be pretty helpful and coming off of that. But it'll be interesting because, he's 35, George Hill 36, Wes Matthews is in that range too. Matthews may even be 37 already. As you look up and down the roster, you mentioned Jordan Nwora, you mentioned Marjan Beauchamp. Are there any other younger guys who really need to step it up this year and take away, in a good way, the minutes from the old heads who, probably should be break in case of emergency guys and guys that you bring in to maybe steady yourself for a quarter, but you're not really wanting to do more than that?
Well, looking up and down the lineup, one of the younger guys that jumps out, and he'll probably start the majority of the time, is Grayson Allen. He was very streaky last year. Mm-hmm. Sometimes he was extremely hot, and other times he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. I feel like if he levels that out, levels the peaks and valleys for that, and just stays pat, I feel like he'll be extremely more valuable to the team, especially with Giannis driving. If he can have a reliable 3-point catch and shoot option, that'll open up the offense for the entirety of the team.
A healthy Pat Connaughton for the entire season is a big one for me, just because he's been another Swiss Army knife type of guy that they can use in all sorts of different lineups. When they go big, they go small. He's got some pop going to the rim. We all know that. We've seen the highlight videos, but is a very, credible 3-point shooter as well. I guess I'm just looking up and down this list, and I see a lot of options that still scare me if Budenholzer is set in his ways versus giving the younger guys more time. Like, I want more Javon Carter, even though shooting is a major problem for him, but I want more of him and less of George Hill. I want as much Grayson Allen, Pat Connaughton, Jordan Nwora as I can get, and a lot less of Wes Matthews, which is no knock on these older players, but the eyeball test has started to catch up to the numbers. And I really saw that last year. I don't know if you did, but in watching Bucks games, it was like, all right, Matthews and Hill haven't had great numbers for a few years, but they still can be reliable. And last year it was like, this is not great. This is the best the Bucks can do. But because Giannis is so good and Middleton is so solid, they cover over a multitude of sins around them. And it just feels like a potential disaster waiting to happen if Holiday or Middleton go down again, when they have had their injury issues, both in Milwaukee and for Drew Holiday in the past in New Orleans. Is Milwaukee vulnerable? Do they need to stay on the trade, conversations? Because Jordan Clarkson, from another Utah Jazz player, has been rumored. Milwaukee was reportedly trying to offer George Hill and a pick in order to get Clarkson, who's an absolute gunner. but is kind of that perfect sixth man. He's really the new and improved version of, well, I shouldn't say improved, but the new version of what you used to get with like a Lou Williams or Jordan Crawford, guys like that, where he's just going to come in and chuck up shots, but your second unit needs that. Or is Milwaukee in a pretty good spot with Brook Lopez coming back healthy and Middleton supposedly will be healthy in time? Are they okay and maybe don't need to like stretch themselves to make that deal, wait for something to fall in their lap instead?
You hit the nail right on the head. I think in the former argument, they are getting up there in age extremely much. And like you said, when George Hill was on the court, and even Wes Matthews, it just felt like they were a step and a half behind at times. And I feel they might be one of the more active teams at the trade deadline, looking for something to fill the holes that are sometimes glaring. They're not always glaring, but they're there. I think every team knows it, that when those guys are on the court, they can take advantage because of the steps that they have lost.
Of course, we can't talk about the Bucks without getting to Giannis, because they will go as Giannis goes. And it's a fairly safe bet that as long as Giannis is in Milwaukee, I don't want to say they have the Central Division locked up, but they are as much of a lock as you can get in just about any other division in the NBA. At the same time, Giannis has been around a bit. You and I have watched him a lot, just like everybody else. You've watched him a ton. He's got a ring now. He's got that ring. Where, if anywhere, can he take his game even further? He's an MVP. He's, been Defensive Player of the Year candidate multiple times, and I think he's got one, right?
He has one the year.
Okay.
Yep.
Where does he go from here in taking himself to that next level? Because the rest of everybody's going to follow, and the incremental improvements that they can make with the roster or just with individual players growing into their own probably still don't even move the needle as much as a minor Giannis improvement, because he's that good.
Well, first and foremost, he's just got to take care of himself, I think. We saw him come back from that scary looking knee injury 2 years ago in the playoffs, and the way he plays, he's getting hit all the time, and if he can stay healthy, he'll still always be up there. But I don't expect that he'll always be as healthy as he has been. He always has a few knee problems here or there, so as long as he can stay healthy, I feel like he's going to be one of the most valuable players in the court. I feel like if the others around him can show that they are a valuable contributor to the team, and he can start trusting them even more, I feel like his game will open up. If he continues to work on his outside shooting, and that just improves even slightly, and continue with his free throws shooting, I feel like the sky's still, it's weird saying that the sky's still the limit for him. He's only 27 years old. He's right in the middle of his prime. I feel like he can still just dominate for years to come.
The last question on Giannis, the fine line with him, interestingly, has kind of become the LeBron conversation of when does Giannis take over and go into scoring mode versus setting up other people. And Giannis has kind of been a feast or famine guy with that, where we've seen certain series, certain times where he just wants to put his head down and barrel into that defense over and over and over again. And yes, he's so good that it sometimes works out, but it's not really that efficient. We've also seen the phenomenal side of Giannis of drawing so much defensive attention and being that unselfish player and setting guys up. Where is on this Bucks team, with the roster that they have, the shooters that they have now, where is that line? We know when push comes to shove, you're going to want to have Giannis with the ball in his hands, and ultimately he's got to be looking for Chris Middleton to knock down game-winning shots. That's been the recipe. That's not going to change. But as a season goes on, in this overall regular season, do you see him needing to be more of like a setup guy and biding his time to stay healthy? Or is this still going to be Milwaukee needs an MVP caliber season from Giannis, including in the scoring department? He's got to dominate, and it's got to be pedal to the metal the whole way.
You could obviously make an argument both ways.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough question, but I feel like Giannis really just needs to control the game. I think the ball in his hands at any point is good for the Bucks. I mean, you've got Drew Holiday who can control and can score points at will at sometimes, and then sometimes he's
also very streaky. Yeah.
Yeah, he's very streaky as well. But
I feel like he's gotten streakier since he's come to Milwaukee, don't you? I don't remember him being that streaky in New Orleans, even when he was the only guy after Anthony Davis had left.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like in Milwaukee, he's got two reliable scorers in Chris Middleton and Giannis that he can be that streaky, and it won't affect the Bucks too much. I mean, obviously you want him to be putting the ball in the basket or distributing the way he does, but he also brings his defense, which is shutdown defense. So really, I think Giannis should just have the mentality of it's going through me, still continue to utilize his other players as he does, because his passing, I think, is underrated. He's got fantastic passing. He's got phenomenal vision of the court. As long as he's got the ball in his hands, whether it's driving or shooting, I'm comfortable with him shooting at this point, even outside shots, because that's going to put it in the defender's mind that, you know what, I got to step up, and that's just going to open up everything. So I feel like he should just keep the pedal to the floor and get to that basket, or if they're taking that away, take the shot.
Chicago was a really good team last year. Cleveland made some big moves. They were a good team last year, and they've made some big moves. We'll get to them in a moment. Nonetheless, I can't imagine, both as a Bucks homer and even just as an NBA fan, and even when we step back and be objective, I can't imagine you're picking the Bucks not to win the division this year. I would have them winning the Central again.
Absolutely.
I mean, because Giannis is there as long as he's healthy.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like it's not going to be necessarily close this year. That's just my personal opinion. I feel like if everyone comes back healthy and stays healthy, I feel like we could run away with it.
Milwaukee did have kind of the championship hangover last year, and injuries as well. 51 wins was definitely lower than expected. But a lot of Eastern Conference teams kind of canceled each other out last year. You saw most of them only with around 50-some wins. Even the other big contenders like Miami and Boston and Philly and that sort of thing. We're going to shift gears now. We're going to go to Chicago. We're doing the Central Division previews. Joel Cordes, Joey Mueller here on Basketball by Association. Check it out on YouTube if you want the video version. Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, where you get the audio version. The Chicago Bulls last year surprised a lot of people. Really put together their rebuild and jumped out of the gate. And then reality started to catch up down the line. I remember doing the preview show last year with Archie Shea. Excuse me. And we looked at that team and we said, we love this starting lineup. We really like the top 7 in the rotation. We are scared as all get out after spot number 7. This team has no depth. It was a carbon copy of how we felt about the Charlotte Hornets. And we said, this team will be very good as long as they stay healthy. And they were very, very good until the injuries started to pop up. Lonzo Ball went down. Alex Caruso missed time. DeMar DeRozan was an Iron Man, but Patrick Williams barely played any of the season. Nick Vucevic missed a few games here or there. They started to have to really kind of spitball and bubblegum stuff together as time went on, and they maintained competitiveness, which was a huge testament to how good DeRozan was. DeMar DeRozan was in MVP candidate talks for a while. Zach LaVine had a great season coming off his Olympic showing, where he brought the scoring that he always does, but was credible on defense, moved the ball, just looked like a veteran all-star type of guard, and it wasn't enough. I mean, because there wasn't that depth there, they finished second in the division. They were only 5 games behind Milwaukee, but you remember at some points it looked like they may even beat Milwaukee for the division. That's how well they started off the season. Not a ton of changes for them either. They bring Goran Dragic in to add some point guard depth, but kind of like a George Hill or Wes Matthews, he's a guy definitely at the end of his career. Patrick Williams is back and healthy. Andre Drummond is brought in, but Drummond at this point is no longer an all-star caliber center. He's a guy who has played very good backup minutes for some pretty decent playoff teams. You look at the Lakers. couple of years ago, he was on Brooklyn. He was on Philly. He's kind of making his rounds. Now he's going to back up Nick Vucevic. Not a lot of other moves there for Chicago, but what excites you about this team? Like, what gives them a shot at least? I know we both picked the Bucks to win the division, but to make it interesting, because they're going to have that Cavaliers team to deal with too, and we'll get to them in a moment. But, yeah, the Bulls are not your favorite team because they're a rival, but you still see a lot of games there. What excites you to watch them this season?
Well, they're young core. They got a young core led by DeMar DeRozan, who, as you said, was in the MVP candidate, or he was a candidate last year at times, and he really showed that he can just take this team to a new level. And at the beginning of the season, the Bulls were just murdering it. And then, as you said, injuries started to happen. Things started to derail just because they got hurt. If this young team can stay hurt and play at any level like they were last year at the beginning of the year, I feel like they will be dangerous.
I think in some ways, those guys getting hurt and Billy Donovan being a very egalitarian type of coach where there's a lot of minutes to be had if you can carve out even just a little bit of reliability in your role. And he turned the keys over somewhat by necessity, but they didn't go hunting for, end of career veterans when things got tough. They just played Ayo Dosunmu and Javonte Green a ton last year. Alex Caruso and Kobe White got all the minutes they could handle in that backcourt. That bodes well for them when they're healthy, because you have these other guys now that have been trained into those positions and those moments to be in a playoff hunt, to make it to the playoffs. And yes, they didn't have a good showing. That they had completely run out of gas by the time they got to the postseason against Milwaukee. But it was a very, I think, inspiring season for the Bulls after so many down years to go, yup, I can see what the blueprint is. I can see where they're trying to go with this. Yeah, we're not going to get MVP seasons out of DeRozan every single year, but he's not as old as everyone thinks. He made jokes about that during his press conference in training camp. He's 33, not 38. And he kept reminding people that, like, yeah, I'm getting out of my prime, but I'm not like deep out of my prime. And Zach LaVine, Caruso, White, Patrick Williams, those guys are all in their mid to early 20s. Nick Vucevic is barely hitting 30 at this point and is a former All-Star in Orlando. There's a lot to like about them. And for me, I'm really excited to see, like, they get Patrick Williams back. He's a guy that I have not understood all the hype necessarily, because he was taken, I believe top 10 by Chicago a couple years ago. They were really, really high on him coming into last year. He gets hurt super early in the season, is out for the whole year. And every time I would watch Bulls broadcasts, that's where Stacey King, that's where everybody was at, like, hoping for Patrick Williams to come back, not necessarily in the season, but saying just wait till next year. And now in camp, he's the guy that everybody's talking about big time again. And for me, I don't know if it'll be the numbers as much as it is the role. Everybody talks about the motor and the versatility, the defense that Patrick Williams has. And as I look up and down the roster, I think I get it. They just don't have somebody like that on the defensive end. Nick Vucevic is kind of a more like smooth offensive player. He's not really like a big shot blocker or anything like that. He's reliable most of the time. He'll get you points and get you rebounds. DeRozan is a scorer. LaVine is a scorer. They've improved defensively. Caruso kind of stepped into that role last year as the defensive energizer bunny, who's really, really good and is a big guard. But to have maybe that complement to him defensively in the front court, maybe that's what we're going to see out of Chicago. And if they have that role for them, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Obviously, the big story is Lonzo Ball is still not healthy, may not be healthy all season. This is starting to get into scary, like, career-altering knee injury where he's had multiple surgeries on this knee before. He's way, way past the 8 weeks they thought it was going to take for him to come back. Now we're like over a year. There's no timetable. He's going to go under the knife again to try to clean some stuff out. The backcourt is still very good. Alex Caruso, Dragic will give you some decent minutes. LaVine and White, I see a big year for Kobe White now, where he was originally drafted to be a starter, and then when they retooled, he kind of fell out of the rotation. This may be his chance. Ayo Dosunmu played some point guard minutes. They're talking about him maybe being the starter there to begin the year just to see. How does the Ball injury deplete them, though? Is it really that big of a deal, or is this still a huge deal? Because think of how good they were when he was healthy during the first half of that season. Him and Zach LaVine just really complemented each other nicely, because Ball's not a shooter per se, but a good passer and a really underrated defender, like really underrated defender.
Oh, absolutely. An injury to a player like Ball on any team is going to affect the team in some way, form, or fashion. The nice thing is, as you stated, those younger players got the playing time last year because of injuries, and so that experience is definitely going to come into play right away to begin the season. Obviously, we hope that Lonzo can come back and he can play back to his caliber of basketball that we are used to seeing the past few seasons. But yeah, it's good that they got that experience last year where they can cover for him until he is able to come back, hopefully sooner rather than later.
The Bulls are still a team that have 3 all-stars, whether former or current, in LaVine, DeRozan, and Vucevic. It's a pretty decent big 3. The depth is a lot better than last year. I still have concerns along that front line. They're banking a lot, again, that Patrick Williams stays healthy. I think Derrick Jones Jr. has shown multiple times now, unfortunately, in Miami, in Chicago last year, in Portland before that, good player, replacement level player, that's it. And not a starter, maybe not a high rotation guy. As your 9th or 10th guy, you're just fine with that. But if Patrick Williams goes down again and they're having to really patch things together on that front line, you may see them having to start Vucevic and Drummond together in a Twin Towers type of lineup. Vucevic did play some power forward early in his career in Philly. They may have to go that route. I think they're a body short up front, at least, and you may see them try to rectify that, or they're going to be going a 4-out approach. If Williams is not healthy or in foul trouble, you may see DeRozan move down to the 4 slot again, which he did some last year. Dosunmu and Javonte Green can give you some minutes there, but it seems like a guard-heavy team, even with Lonzo Ball out of the picture. They finished second last year. They, as far as we've said, they're not going to finish any higher than second. Do you see them being able to repeat that feat? Is it going to be a tougher sled, or should we really be worried about the next team coming up on the list, which is Cleveland?
I think they're definitely going to be worried about Cleveland, especially depending on the length of how long Lonzo Ball's out. I mean, Zach LaVine has shown prior to DeRozan and Ball being there that he can be the guy. So him and DeMar can definitely keep this team in the right direction. I do feel like they're still going to take the 2nd seed, but it's going to be a dogfight with Cleveland, I believe.
Okay. This one is tough, but I think I'm probably going to get on the hype and put Chicago in 3rd. Which, spoiler alert, that's going to be Cleveland, not Indiana or Detroit in 2nd. I feel like Chicago caught a lot of people and they overachieved, and Billy Donovan is a really good NBA coach and is really utilitarian and just resourceful is maybe the even better word. So I think regardless of what happens, he's going to keep them in that hunt and it's going to be close. I don't think the Bucks run away with the division the way that you had said. I think it's going to be close-ish between these 3 teams, and they're going to win some games against each other and some big games against each other. But yeah, I'll put Chicago in 3rd for right now, just because I'm not a huge fan of their depth, and we'll talk a little bit more about why I'm so high on Cleveland. Joey Mueller, Joel Cordes here on Basketball by Association. You can find us on YouTube, like, share, subscribe over there, and then StreamYard, Spotify, Spreaker, iTunes, all the different places you get your podcasts. You can find Basketball by Association there as well. This is the Central Division preview. We've got 3 other divisions that we've completed so far. You can see that in the show archives. 2 more left to go after this. Archie Shea will be joining me for at least one of those. Chances are it'll be the Pacific Division when we talk about the champs, the Golden State Warriors, and we've got the Southeast Division yet to do as well. Let's talk Cleveland Cavaliers. I don't know that there were many teams in the league who made a bigger splash this offseason than the Cavs did, which is interesting timing considering that they were, like Chicago, one of the early season surprises last year. Really jumped on a lot of people, played well. They were a top 3, top 4 team in the East multiple times in the standings throughout last year. And unlike Chicago, where it was really injury driven, Cleveland's youth started to catch up to them right down the end of that stretch. It's an analogy, a comparison that I use to Major League Baseball all the time. You see this all the time in baseball. Some young team pops out, is really hot for 4/5 of the season, and might be winning a division, might even be like looking at a pennant. And then all of a sudden, those last like 4 weeks of the season, things get real tight and they start dropping games that they shouldn't, or at least they didn't early on, and they hit the playoffs, and suddenly that inexperience shows. They had lost that momentum. Maybe doubt starts to creep in, or maybe other teams just caught up to them, and they don't necessarily have a great showing in the playoffs. That was the Cleveland Cavaliers last year, but there was so much to like about a team that I was on record as picking to finish last in the division last year. Like, I picked Detroit and Indiana to finish ahead of the Cavs, and they came in that hot. And then yet a young team like that makes a move for a multi-time all-star who is also young and fits in. Donovan Mitchell coming aboard. We'll get to the rest of the Cavs in a minute, but do you like this move for them? Is this the right guy for the right time for a team? Sometimes teams like swing for the fences and they try to bring in that big piece and they're not actually quite ready for that yet, or it changes the chemistry and the way things were. This was a team that, and this was Darius Garland's team. This was going to be Evan Mobley's team. And Donovan Mitchell comes in, and he has had a longer career, obviously, but he's got the bona fides from being in Utah and some really good teams there that kind of sputtered in the playoffs the last couple of years. Like it, love it, just okay with it? How do you feel about Mitchell coming in?
I love it. I think he's the right guy for Cleveland. Yes, I feel like maybe they gave a little too much, but obviously you're going to have to get a guy of Donovan Mitchell's caliber. I feel like he's going to continue his trajectory that he has shown that he can take it in Utah, and I feel like he's right for the job.
I like it because of Mitchell's ability to go off book and just manufacture points. He was the only guy in Utah who could do that. And that was oftentimes their undoing, is that they were a very system-oriented team. When the wheels were working right, Utah was really tough to stop. But you saw when they'd get deep in the playoffs and you'd run into some really talented teams, and suddenly Donovan Mitchell was the only guy who they could seemingly set up for points, or who could set up other people or set up himself when plays would break down. And that was really the same problem in Cleveland last year. As they jumped out, Darius Garland was the guy. I mean, played at an all-star level, really seemed to get this breath of fresh air when he didn't have to share the backcourt with Colin Sexton and was able to be the point guard. Sexton was originally supposed to be the point guard and Garland was going to be the shooting guard with him, and it worked. It was all right. You saw where it could go, but there was still this idea of like, we might have to break up this duo at some point. Sexton gets hurt. Garland gets the keys of the car, never looks back. And he had a lot of shooting and a lot of size. Cleveland last year flipped the script in a way that a few other teams like New Orleans, Oklahoma City's trying this, Memphis has been toying around with it, going big and kind of ending the small ball era by really going against the grain. Nobody was better at it, I think, than Cleveland last year, where they were trotting out 3 7-footers on their front line, something that has really not been done since the 90s. And Lauri Markkanen was a huge part of that, former Chicago Bull, originally drafted by the Timberwolves. He was knocking down threes from the small forward spot. He's not a great defender, but he didn't have to be because Evan Mobley looks like the real deal on the front line, especially defensively, but he could knock down a jumper. And then you had Jared Allen, who is supremely underrated as a defensive guy and just a grinder at the center position. And it worked until they got to the playoffs. And then suddenly the machinery on offense not working as well. Darius Garland seems to be the only guy who can make shots. Karis LeVert, who was brought in from Brooklyn, was supposed to be that other guy who could score. He's fulfilled that role before, but he did not play all that well during the playoffs. And so to me, bringing in Mitchell with Garland's kind of a big point guard. Mitchell's a little undersized at shooting guard. They're going to be interchangeable because Mitchell has run point guard before. Garland's run shooting guard before. The ability to have at least one of those guys on the floor at all times to make something happen for everyone else and to make something happen for themselves is going to be really intriguing. I think the biggest question is, how did those two play together? I'm not really worried about that. I still look up and down the roster and I go, all right, LeVert, he can put the ball in the basket. But all right, Evan Mobley really is going to have to jump here and score some points. And Kevin Love, who was a 6th Man of the Year candidate last year and played really, really well coming off the bench, he was finally healthy. We don't know if he was healthy or not healthy during the rebuild before this, but he stepped in, played good minutes when he wasn't overexposed. I think at the power forward position, they're going to get some points. But Jared Allen, not a scorer. Isaac Okoro, not a scorer. Jetty Osman, I'm not sure what he is as an NBA player. I see little bits and pieces, but Ricky Rubio coming back from injury was phenomenal for them last year when he was healthy. He was one of the major injuries that kind of took the wheels off by midseason, but not a scorer. He's a setup guy. I'm still not exactly sure where enough points come from and if they're able to maintain the defensive identity with the size, but I'm really excited to find out. If there's one other player besides Donovan Mitchell, who are you like zooming in on, or who do you think like has to have that step forward season?
Evan Mobley for sure. If he can continue to improve, I feel like it's going to add that third or fourth scorer on the court. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell's going to get his. Darius Garland's going to get his. Mm-hmm. If you can add just even a minor threat, it's going to jump their offense forward and more forward and more forward. I mean, their second string is not horrible.
No,
I mean, you got Jared Allen, who's going to grind and grind and grind. Robin Lopez will give you 12 minutes a game of hard basketball.
And I'm glad you brought up Lopez, because they may not even need him. Part of the blessing of the injuries last year is they got long looks at Lamar Stevens and Dean Wade, who they just extended Wade's contract, and they got rotation minutes and were above replacement value. And those guys' ability to step into the power forward spot means that Mobley gets to play some center. They're really, really deep on that front line still, which is probably why they thought they could, move Markkanen in order to get Mitchell, even though Markkanen was so valuable for them. But yeah, I mean, Mobley is exciting. Mobley was better than advertised, and some people thought he was the best player taken in the draft. It's still a toss-up. Scotty Barnes looked really, really good in Toronto, but Mobley was that good last year and NBA ready. Like, he just understood the game. He understood his rotations. He seemed to understand his limitations. He was able to knock down shots. I'm really excited for him. I look at Cleveland, though. For me, it's Karis LeVert. Like, he played so poorly down the final stretch when they really needed that score that his name has been on the trade block, or at least in the rumors. And if you're able to get him to play 6-man minutes with Kevin Love, and you got 2 scorers off the bench, and Mobley does exactly what you said, that's why when I look at Cleveland, I go, they just seem to have more opportunities for things to really click, and there's more upside there for it to go right. And that's why I'm picking them over Chicago for a team, Bulls team that was really, really good, but I felt like maybe overachieved and kind of hit what they were going to be. Cleveland reminds me a lot of the Memphis Grizzlies, where all of a sudden when they took their leap, like, Memphis was just punching people in the mouth last year and were that good and were way ahead of schedule. And I see that potential with the Cavs, which is why I'm going to pick them over the Bulls in second for the division. You had them in third. Is there a concern or a reason why, or is it just, no, I think the Bulls will be better. They're a little more veteran. They got Billy Donovan coaching. What's the difference?
Well, for me, like I said, I think it's going to be a dogfight coming down to the end. And the reason why I think it's going to be a dogfight is because I think it might take a little bit for the chemistry to be built in Cleveland between Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell and the rest of the team. I don't think that chemistry is going to be immediate. When you bring on a star player like Donovan Mitchell, yes, it's going to catapult your team forward, but you still have to build that chemistry. The chemistry isn't immediate. So I feel like it's going to take them maybe a month and a half for them to get the chemistry. And so I don't think they're going to jump out to a hot start and then they're going to come on, and it'll be a dogfight coming down to the end.
Every single season, there is a team on our preview series that we devote like 90 seconds to, maybe 2 minutes, because there's just not much to say and not much nice to say. In the past, it's been the Orlando Magic, it's been the Oklahoma City Thunder. This year, I think it's going to be the Indiana Pacers. And I'm going to start with the positives. They blew things up, moving people left and right, although Miles Turner is still inexplicably there, but is young. I will say this, and Buddy Hield's still there, but he's a lock to get moved before the trade deadline of this year. I don't hate the young players that they've started trying to sort of collect. Tyrese Halliburton, I don't think is a building block. I think Sacramento was incredibly savvy to move Halliburton in order to get Domantas Sabonis, who I think can be your second best player. I think Halliburton can be your third best player, but is going to be a really, really, really good third best player, maybe like Drew Holiday level third best. I like Chris Duarte. He came on like gangbusters last year at the beginning of his rookie season, and people figured him out. But a big backcourt with him and Halliburton. I'm excited to see what happens there. Indiana very savvily picked up Aaron Nesmith from the Boston Celtics during the offseason as a gunner at the small forward spot. I see what they're trying to do. Jalen Smith was intriguing in Phoenix. O'Shea Brissett gave Indiana some good minutes when the wheels really went off last year. And Turner is still there as a guy who, as a defensive player of the year caliber type of guy, he's still fairly young. Maybe they're going to give him 3 months yet because they haven't still found the type of deal that they want. Give him 3 months to see, does he actually fit on the timeline with these guys? Can he play the good soldier route? I don't know. So I don't hate what they're trying to do. But in the meantime, I can't imagine anybody except maybe really sick NBA addicts like myself tuning into the Indiana Pacers by choice this year. Like if they're playing your Bucks, if they're playing a team that you're really wanting to watch, and it's like, all right, find the Pacers there. But like, yikes, this is not going to be pretty, right?
Oh no, I don't think it's going to be pretty at all. And you hit it on the head. I think the only time I'll ever be watching them is if the Bucks play him, and that's in hopes that Giannis hits a triple double or something. They don't bring much to the table. Yes, they're in full rebuild mode. I don't see Buddy Hield being on the team by the trade deadline, and for that matter, I don't think I see Miles Turner on the team by the trade deadline either.
I don't want to see him on the team by the end of that point because Turner had his shot to be a building block in Indiana. Again, this is a guy where great shot blocker, not a good rebounder, but a decent three-point shooter, good defender overall, decent scorer. But what does that make him? It makes him a modern NBA starting center and a very credible one at that, who's a fringe all-star. That's not a top 2 or 3 player. And if you can fool someone, if Miles Turner can have a big 3 months here on a team that's going to need him to score and do just about everything, and you can fool someone into thinking that Turner is that, formerly the Knicks were talking, like, here's your moment, Archie Shea, where we talk about the Knicks. We do it every single episode. Fool the Knicks into thinking that they still want Miles Turner, or anybody. He could be very helpful for a team that's not in a rebuild, and he could be helpful if he's not that second or third block. So I'm going to go on record. I put the Pacers at the bottom of the division this year, sliding down into 5th. Again, there's a few players that I'll be keeping an eye on and maybe a time or two that I'll tune in, but I'll be one of 3 people that will actually do that. Do you agree? Are they going to be worse than Detroit?
I think they're going to be worse than Detroit. Detroit has showed me some very promising things at the end of the season last year and in this offseason. I don't think it's going to be much of a competition for that last place spot. I think Indiana's shored that up pretty heftily.
Pacers, be as bad as you possibly can. Victor Wembanyama is supposedly the real deal. Like, that could be a franchise-changing thing. There's going to be other teams totally tanking. San Antonio's going into their rebuild. Oklahoma City, now that Chet Holmgren got hurt, everybody else is magically going to get hurt as well, and they're going to tank another year. There's going to be teams in that hunt, but Indiana, you could win by losing. Get Miles Turner off that roster and lose as many games as you possibly can. So we moved down to the bottom of the division, but maybe not bottom for all that much longer. The Detroit Pistons have been pretty woeful the last couple of years. They were one of those teams that we did not devote much time to. But I did say this last year. I said for them exactly what I just said about the Pacers. Last year it was, I get it. I get what you're trying to do. I see the young guys that you're bringing in. I see how theoretically this could work. The jury was still out on Cade Cunningham at the point. He had an injury-riddled season, and we saw flashes. but he didn't embarrass himself, nor did we get any worries about being a bust. It really more is just like, okay, give me a full season. Let's see how good you actually can be. But they draft Jaden Ivey. Killian Hayes did look like a bust last year and has dealt with injury issues, but now Hayes is going to move back into the second unit. Sadiq Bey came out of nowhere and really looked like an NBA scorer in the making. They're going to kick the tires on Kevin Knox and Marvin Bagley, some former lottery picks who they can do something that's going to be great. I don't know how long guys like Nerlens Noel and Bojan Bogdanovic will actually be in Detroit. These are veterans. Corey Joseph is really the locker room guy, but they've got some veterans, Alec Burks, who Detroit's probably holding on just to show guys the ropes, make guys, the young guys, earn their spots, earn their minutes early in the season. And once they do earn those minutes, those veterans are going to get shipped out at the trade deadline for picks or guys that fit. Isaiah Stewart, I don't know if he's a starting center in the NBA, but he's certainly a rotation level center, and he proved that last year, and there's some upside. So I went to a few Pistons games last year. You see him on TV from time to time, and obviously as a Bucks fan, you're going to see him. Like, there were some really painful nights, but there were some promising nights too.
Oh, absolutely. And the very first person you mentioned, Cade Cunningham, if he can stay healthy and just continue to work and get the experience in the NBA, he's shown flashes that he can be the guy in Detroit. And so really it's just the health and just continue to work hard. This entire roster, I feel like if they just continue to play together, they've shown that they can play well together. And we've got like Marvin Bagley, if he can start playing, he's shown flashes from here and there. So if they can all work together, continue just to gain that chemistry and gain that experience, I feel like they could start putting things together. And yes, those older players, they're definitely going to be shipped out for picks or other players, but we'll see what this team looks like at the end of the season. I feel like it's going to be different, but I feel like they're definitely going to be playing together really well.
Detroit has a far better pedigree on the roster than I think people realize, just because they have been such an NBA backwater. Cunningham and Ivy now, Killian Hayes, Bagley, even Kevin Knox, who was a bust in New York, and Atlanta really didn't give much of a look. There's a lot of high lottery picks on this team that you're going to hit on a couple of those. And then you also have had a couple young diamonds in the rough, like Bay and like Isaiah Stewart, where they're outplaying, regardless of what you get. They don't need to be all-stars, but they are outplaying their draft position by quite a bit, which means you really nailed that. So there's some interesting things to build on. Yet you're going to give minutes, as many as you can, to these guys. It's going to get ugly at times, but I feel like where the blueprint used to be, you want to have an all-star big and an all-star guard. And then, if you can find that third all-star, that was really going to be the ticket. There's a lot of teams out there. We just talked about Cleveland kind of having this, where we've got some really dynamite backcourts where you have multiple all-stars, and Lonzo Ball, Zach LaVine, that was kind of the blueprint there as well. We're starting to see more and more of that, and maybe it's been a Warriors thing because they've won kind of with a backcourt-centric group, although Draymond Green's been an all-star before, but that's really where they've buttered their bread. I see the blueprint in Detroit, and I haven't even seen Jaden Ivey play. I don't think Killian Hayes is going to be that guy, but I think Hayes as either a spot starter or the bench guy really fits well, because you've got a big backcourt that can score from multiple different layers. I'm excited to see what Ivy can do. This is the first time since I've lived in Michigan, and it's been 13 going on 14 years, where I will go to Pistons games now this season because I actually want to see the Pistons play, and I'm intrigued by what's there, and I want to get on the Cade Cunningham bandwagon and at least be able to go when it's still cheap enough for me to afford being able to go. I haven't been able to say that, and they've had some playoff caliber teams, but it's like Andre Drummond, Josh Smith, those guys never felt like actual building blocks. They were all-stars masquerading as building blocks because Detroit couldn't get better. Cunningham feels like there is that possibility to be a guy that you truly build around, and then the rest of the pieces can fit, and you could have a Pistons playoff team, like not one that snuck into the playoffs, but one that is a legit playoff, type of threat in the next couple of seasons. And I'm excited for that. It's been a long time since we've been able to say that. So I've got Detroit in fourth. I assume you've got them in fourth too. The bigger question, I suppose, is how far back of Chicago and Cleveland do you think they finished? I mean, last year, we'll pull up the standings here. It's been 20 win seasons in Detroit for a long, long time. It was just 23 last year. Cleveland was ninth. They made the play-in tournament. They were third in the division with 44 wins. The Bulls were the sixth seed at 46. So there was not a lot of room there at the bottom of the play-in field. You see Detroit winning close to 40 games this year? Is that way too many? Are they high 30s, low 30s? Like, I don't see them winning 23, 25 games again. They're going to be better than that.
No, they're going to be better than that. I still don't see them making the 40 win mark. I don't think that big of a jump is happening. I feel like we're going to see 35, maybe 37. 40 would be asking a lot, but I feel like the talent's there, the young talent is there, and when they start getting that experience, I feel like it'll start snowballing. And so yeah, I feel like there's going to be a jump. 40 wins would be asking a lot.
All right, so to recap, Joey, order your division for me, the Central Division.
I got the Bucks, the Bulls, the Cavaliers, the Pistons, then the Pacers.
All right, so I will go Bucks. I'm going to take the Cavs second. I feel pretty confident about that, but I love the Bulls too. We'll put them in third. Detroit fourth. Indiana fifth. All right, everybody, what do you think? Where's everybody going to finish? Leave us comments on that. Did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? Tell us why. Again, you want the video version. YouTube is where it's at. Give us the like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff over there. Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes is where you get the audio only, if that's your jam. This has been the Joe Johnson episode. 120 is in the books. Joey Mueller, thank you for stopping by and talking Bucks basketball with me. It was fun.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll get Archie Shea back in here. One of these days, he'll show up for work. We've still got the Pacific Division to do. We've got the Southeast. I think Southeast is coming up next. And again, check out the other videos. Check out the other audio podcasts if you want the previous three divisions that we did as well. Man, the season is close. I'm getting excited. I'm counting down the days. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, Joe Johnson, hope we did you proud. Enjoy spending all that money, my friend. And please come on back for at least one game this year. Really love it.